30. Godzilla vs. Hedorah. I just recently reviewed this movie, so if you want a more in-depth look, then go watch it. Okay, so I don't get why this movie shows up on so many best of Godzilla film lists. This movie is just a pretentious environmental film, and it's a case of a director that just went insane, doing whatever the hell he liked, and he wanted to film stuff that he thought, oh, that would look super cool on film, and not thinking about if it actually made any sense in the context of the movie. I know a lot of film students will tell me that it's amazing and I don't get the symbolism of this movie, and all these shots mean something in the grand scheme of things, but that's the thing, this is a Godzilla movie. There's only one thing Godzilla should symbolise, and that's what the first movie did perfectly. And when you come to think about it, using a metaphor for the horrors of the atomic bomb and now changing it to be a grand defender of the environment doesn't make any real sense. Now, I know a lot of Godzilla movies before this have, not been a symbol of nuclear destruction and all that sort of stuff, but they weren't using Godzilla as Captain Planet. But also in just filmmaking itself, there's a lot of this movie where nothing happens. There's just overly long scenes of characters just standing around, or Godzilla and Hedorah just standing around looking at each other or looking at a thing, not doing anything. It just doesn't make any sense with how boring and then just weird this movie gets. It goes from 0 to 100 very quickly and then back to 0 again. This movie is also tonally just insane, with really dark and disturbing imagery, especially for a quote-unquote kids movie, and then goes to hippie 70s cheese fest. This movie can't stick to a tone, it's just all over the place from start to finish. And then we got the annoying tropes that quite a lot of Godzilla movies of this era had. For example, the annoying kid that loves Godzilla. Yes, straight from Gamera. He's an annoying kid that loves Godzilla, and he's not as annoying as some Gamera kids, and he kind of just has no part in the third act of this movie. He just stands around watching. But really, he's not as annoying as some of the human grown-up characters are in this movie. The scientist and his wife are fine, they're just bland characters, but the two hippie characters are so annoying because they're just annoying hippie characters. It's just hard to put a finger on just why they're so annoying, but they are, because that's all they do all the time. Is they're very irresponsible, their actions are very stupid, and they're always jovial and just think everything's gonna go swimming for them. And let's not forget that this movie has the most ridiculous thing ever put to film, with Godzilla flying. There's a reason this scene became so infamous. It's just insane, and out of nowhere too. Godzilla just decides he can do this now. And also it has the worst soundtrack in Godzilla history. It is just a collection of instruments being played at once. Godzilla's theme sounds like something you'd hear on Looney Tunes, and it also has a James Bond title song. I don't get it, it's all over the place. The only real positive thing I can say is that Hedorah itself, when they were being horrifying with it, generally was scary. Its design was scary, and it did scare me as a kid. But the rest of the movie is just completely insane. It's a failed art house movie that makes no sense, and it's just pretentious, really. Number 29. Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. What happens when you take a King Kong script and just cross out King Kong and replace it with Godzilla? You get Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. One of the most bog-standard Godzilla movies out there. Unlike the later Showa-era Godzilla movies that got ridiculous, this movie is still in the try to make it serious era, so there's not much really goofy stuff that happens. Hell, Godzilla doesn't even wake up till an hour into the movie, and Mothra is asleep until the last 10 minutes. As for Ebirah, well, it's a King Kong villain that's put up against Godzilla, so it really stands no chance. Ebirah gets its ass kicked in the two fights it's in. It is basically just a giant crab, or shrimp, or some kind of lobster crab shrimp hybrid thing. It has no special powers, it is just a lobster, which also somehow seems to have the James Bond theme. Okay, fine. And as for the human villains, well, the Red Bamboo, try to set up as the recurring big bads of future Godzilla movies, but they only make one appearance and never come back again. And they are basically a terrorist group, so of course when Godzilla shows up, they're vastly outmatched. And while the movie starts them off being an imposing threat, by the end of the movie they're just laughable in just how kind of bad and pathetic they are. I especially love how in all the scenes that the military soldiers are in, They just start firing randomly, and in some of the shots it clearly looks like they fired into the backs of their own men. They do come off as idiots sometimes, considering how they have set up this grand military base, which apparently they've been there for years, but have never heard or even found Godzilla sleeping away in the mountain. And also, if you think about it, their grand plan for getting people to work for them, getting their slaves, is to attack an island with a goddess protecting it. Yeah, she's asleep at the time, but think about it, when she wakes up, she's going to be pretty pissed. So these guys were doomed from the start, if you think about it. As for the other main characters, well, this movie has a problem where it has far too many main characters. We start off the movie with 4, and by the end we have about 8. So none of them really get much development apart from maybe Dio and the crime guy. They're the only ones who really kind of have some kind of character development and arc, and the rest, well, at some point actually I kind of get some of them confused. There's so many of them that this movie doesn't really know what to do with a lot of them. So they separate a few of them and then they just sort of disappear from the movie and don't really show up until the end. Apart from the rest of the movie, there's not really much to say. It's just not that interesting. It does get good when Godzilla wakes up, but that's like in the last half hour. And they do cram in a lot in the last half hour, but you have to slog through an hour of just not a lot happening. And scenes that, when you think about it, just lead nowhere and end with nothing happening. I mean, it is the first Godzilla movie to have Godzilla not attack a huge big city. It's basically Godzilla on an island, but it kind of struggles because when Godzilla shows up, he doesn't have that much to destroy. It's just a very small base, and that's it. There's not really that much in this movie. It's just a bog standard, a bit boring Godzilla movie. That's about it. It doesn't really do anything. And that's because it wasn't supposed to be a Godzilla movie to begin with. Number 28. Godzilla Raids again. It's amazing how quickly a film series can lose its original meaning from the first movie, but Godzilla Raids again does it very, very quickly. You could sue for whiplash with how much of a rush this movie is, and it really does come off that way. The Godzilla suit is probably one of the worst Godzilla's ever had, and the plot is just, it's a Godzilla shows up with another monster. How are the humans going to deal with it? That's the movie. There is not a lot, there really isn't much at all. It's also a very short movie, and that just really tells with how much of a rushed time it has. And while this movie is important because it becomes the template for every Godzilla vs. movie, this is the first one and it has a lot of issues because of it. Mostly due to the fact of how rushed it was. It has a paper-thin script with very bland and undeveloped characters, and the returning cast is really underused. There is also so much filler in this movie. Anguirus being the first Godzilla movie that Godzilla fights is dealt with halfway through the movie, and then the movie just struggles with what to do with for the rest of it. And the final plan to get rid of Godzilla at the end goes on for way too long. This movie is so full of issues. The characters have the complexity of boiled rice and are just as interesting, but there are parts I like Anguirus being my favourite kaiju, so that's a plus. And this being the first Godzilla fight, while it's not one of the best, I do like it because this is one of the few Godzilla fights where the monsters actually act like animals in how they fight. With a lot of the fight, the monsters just being scratching, biting and tackling into each other, and also a lot of moments of them just stopping and sizing each other up. With how ridiculous some of the Godzilla fights get later on, it's nice that the first has a bit of realism to it. But apart from that, there's not much in this movie either. It is basically a rushed Godzilla movie, made less than a year after the first one, and it really, really shows. A lot of this movie's problems have to do with how quickly it was made, less than a year after the first one, and it really shows with just how rushed it is. When Godzilla and Anguirus aren't on screen, you can basically just skip the rest of this movie. There's not much that happens. Just have the two monsters fight each other and then skip to the end. You can be done with this movie in less than half an hour. It's one of the most skippable Godzilla movies. Number 27. Godzilla vs. Gigan. Yep, I put this movie above Raids Again and Hedorah. Yep, do you want to know why I put this movie higher than a lot of people would? Because this was the first Godzilla movie I ever watched. And well, yeah, a little biased towards that, and well, I do like the last third of this movie despite all the stock footage, but I didn't know that when I was a kid, so this movie was awesome. You got a good half hour of 4 kaijus just beating the crap out of each other. All the kaiju stuff is pretty good. Gigan, the new kaiju, which is one of the most interesting and most unique kaijus there's ever been, and is one of my all-time favourite, and you've got King Ghidorah coming back. The King Ghidorah suit has seen better days. it's definitely great to see King Ghidorah back and absolutely kicking ass. And also it has Anguirus in it, and he's my babe. All the fights are really good, and every monster gets a moment to shine. This is also the first Godzilla movie to have Godzilla draw blood. It really does feel like an absolute beatdown of each other monster. It's an absolute slogfest. It feels like these are 4 kaijus just going at each other until only 2 are left. It is one of my favourite fights, despite all the stock footage. However, the rest of the movie is annoying. The characters especially. The main lead is a man-child who acts goofy in serious situations, and we're supposed to find it funny and endearing, but you just want the bad guys to shoot him. His girlfriend really should have been the main hero of this, but no, she's just relegated to woman character. Even though she's an absolute ass kicker during this movie, during the end of the movie she is basically just relegated to screaming woman. And the other characters are, well, a lot of them don't really do anything, they're just there. But I really also do like the villains. Despite how complicated and ridiculous their plan is, I generally like them. They have a good motivation, they have a good origin, and while their plan, while ridiculous, while they think they can take over the world with 2 kaiju, when there's a planet full of them, is a bit ridiculous, but you know, it's funny, especially with how deadpan and serious they're taking this, and how their grand plan basically got destroyed by a comic book artist. That's just hilarious. But really, apart from the main villains, everything else in this movie is kind of bog standard Godzilla stuff. Aliens show up, they want to take over the world and destroy it, they have 2 kaiju, Godzilla and his partner fight them. Apart from the last fight of the movie, 2/3 of this movie can be completely skipped. And, well, yeah, it is my first Godzilla movie, so it'll always hold a place in my heart, but yeah, looking back at it now, it wasn't that great. Number 26. Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. The weakest movie in the Millennium series, this is just a bog standard Godzilla movie. It doesn't add anything, it doesn't do much that's new to the series, it is basically just another Godzilla fights another monster and the military try to kill Godzilla movie. It is as simple as it comes, and I didn't even know it was supposed to be a reboot, not taking place after Godzilla 2000, when pretty much the Godzilla suits are pretty much identical to each other. It's very confusing if you didn't know that. There is plenty of Godzilla action in this movie, which is always a plus, but Megaguirus doesn't really show up until the very end of the movie and just has a fight with Godzilla. Has no real development, it's just, here's Megaguirus, it fights Godzilla and it's dead. But to be fair, this is one of my favourite fights in all of the Godzilla series. It is just a great fun fight, and it's something only the Japanese could do. I really do enjoy this fight, it's just such fun. It has hilarious moments, it has genuine moments where Godzilla looks like he might lose. Megaguirus does at times pose a threat, but also Godzilla holds his own against this bug thing. But apart from that, this movie doesn't really have anything but cliched characters. You have the hard-ass dark character who has a past with Godzilla and wants to destroy Godzilla because Godzilla did something to them in their past. Something that, well, quite a few Godzilla movies seem to really like doing. And this one's one of the most blandest. Her character will be done much better 2 movies later. And we also have the nerdy, annoying tech guy. This movie also looks like it's going to have an annoying kid character, but he just disappears halfway through the movie. But he's very integral to the plot because he basically gets Megaguirus going. He can't be removed from the movie because he's needed, but once he's done with, he just disappears from the movie. I mean, the only real thing that this movie does, which is just downright ridiculous, is the plan to deal with Godzilla. Not only with how insane the idea is, but with also how quickly they managed to pull off basically a singularity gun, which they basically call a black hole gun, which they don't see any downside to, despite the fact that this thing is basically a black hole gun. But they wrote themselves into a corner because if it was a black hole gun, they could just fire it whenever they want and kill Godzilla, but apparently the black hole gun doesn't work in water, so they have to get Godzilla on land to kill him. But what if they target Godzilla and it becomes a rainy day? Does that mean it's not going to work then? It doesn't make much sense when you think about it. Also not considering the fact that, well, if this gun worked at full power, it could basically destroy the whole planet. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, apart from that, this is just another Godzilla movie where Godzilla fights another kaiju that's related somehow to Godzilla. And the military have a latest idea to kill Godzilla that, of course, they guarantee will kill Godzilla once and for all, but of course it backfires and breaks and doesn't work, and well, Godzilla just survives it because he always survives it. Their black hole gun breaks all laws of physics. It's the single most ridiculous weapon in a Godzilla movie, but apart from that, it is just a bog standard Godzilla flick. and that was 30 to 26. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and you know, what movies would you put in those same spots? And if you want to see the next episode a little bit earlier, you could please check out my Patreon, give me a little, you know, support me out if you want to. Give me a little support, but if not, then, you know, tune in next week as we go into 25 to 21. And I'm Alexthehunted, and I will see you guys next time.